So good evening, everyone, wherever it is. I'm just saying good evening to everyone. And welcome once again into our circle of reflection for this esteemed group of elders as we labor to make meaning and find joy and courage in this phase of our earthly journey. So, Denny, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, dear Kathleen, and hi to everyone. Thanks for taking the time to take on this somewhat daunting task, a little bit of a paradox. Certainly, we're calling this session this evening Befriending Death and Dying. Now, there's a paradox. But when you think of it, life is the ultimate paradox, and death is the ultimate mystery on which it turns. I suppose death is clearly part of life. It's certainly a big part of every individual life, not simply as an ending, but also as a becoming. Death is part of every moment, every day. But life, I suppose, with a capital uppercase L is the underpinning reality, the ground of being itself, the essence of every individual life. We say that doesn't die. We kind of know this deep down and express this intuition when we say, even in the face of death, even in the face of the loss of someone close, we say things like, life must go on. Life must go on. I suppose death as the fundamental condition for life in all its forms to evolve, unfold, and become should be the source of constant joy and gratitude, technically, right? I suppose, nonetheless, death is experienced by most of us as loss and even threat. One of our favorite poets, Wendell Berry, describes this paradox and this tension. He says, it may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. You know that poem? Clearly, as we get closer to the experience of dying, we realize, or perhaps finally admit, that we no longer know what to do or which way to go. This, says Berry, is where the real work of being a human being actually begins. It's holding the tension that the challenge of not knowing brings, that constitutes our uniquely human way. It is being baffled, as he says later in his poem, it's being baffled and yet staying the course that generates our unique human song. But to be able to do this real work, we need a meaning structure, what the other Berry, Thomas Berry, calls a cosmology, or in cultural terms, a story of origin, a story of everything and everyone. And we've explored this story in earlier sessions. So what we want to do here to help us explore the mystery of death is simply remind ourselves of this infinite framework, and then reflect on what we can do to integrate this mystery of death into the eldering stage of our lives. Discover how to integrate all of it, even in the face of what can appear like despair. As we've noted already, Erik Erikson describes this eldering aging stage of our journey as integration versus despair. I think we all know what he means. Mary Oliver will help us with the first part, and my friend Rilke will help us with the second part, as we'll see. I have a great story to tell you tonight, but I thought we might begin with a wonderful poem by Mary Oliver that some of you know called Fall Song. And I can put it up on the screen, and maybe our friend Catherine would read it. Let me just share our screen. Oh, wrong one. That one. Let me see up here, just scroll up a little bit. Can you see that, Kathleen?
I have it. Also, another year gone, leaving everywhere its rich, spiced residues, vines, leaves, the uneaten fruits crumbling damply in the shadows, unmattering back from the particular island of this summer, this now, that now is nowhere except underfoot, moldering in that black subterranean castle of unobservable mysteries, roots and sealed seeds, and the wandering water. This I try to remember when time is measured painfully chafes. For instance, when autumn flares out at the last, voices and like us, longing to stay, how everything lives, shifting from one bright vision to another, forever in these momentary pastures.
Thank you, Kathleen. I've been working with this poem a lot over the past few weeks in preparation for this. I think it's powerful. Another year, another individual life gone, dead. That's the word. Leaving all it has contributed along with all it didn't realize. Unmattering back. For in the larger scheme of life itself, this part doesn't seem to matter, for each life form has contributed only as much as it could. Now, as life itself continues to unfold, the particular form of this individual year or person has simply folded back into what the poet calls the now that now is nowhere, she says. Though I would be inclined to add the words the now that now is everywhere. For in fact, I think nothing is lost, nothing goes away. If you look at the word nowhere a little closer, you see that it is made up of the words now and here. Nowhere can be understood as now, here, now, in a more fundamental way, perhaps. As the poet continues, this form that life has discarded, in a sense, has returned to its source, the black subterranean castle of unobservable mysteries, in order to return again to the form or vehicle for life's continuing unfolding. Incarnation, the ultimate Christian perspective, implies reincarnation, at least in an essential sense. We can come back to this, I think, in a later conversation on what we call the afterlife or simply after death. Well, but let's just hold that for a moment. For now, it's enough to remember this framework of meaning and becoming. When time's measure painfully chafes, as it does when we lose someone close or feel our own ending near at hand, as we do when we're older, often. I do. That everything and every one of us lives forever, is the way Mary Oliver puts it, shifting, as she describes it, from one bright vision to another, from one bright moment to another. Forever in these momentary pastures, life lives forever in everything and in all of us as momentary pastures that each reflect the bright vision that impels us all. I've tried to work these thoughts into our meditation, a little mindfulness meditation, if you can bear with me and see if I can stay with this. But keep your eye on the poem and let me invite you into a mindfulness meditation on befriending death and dying. So position yourself comfortably, always relaxed, but also alert. Keep your back a little straight, your hands in your lap, your eyes closed or softened, and take 3 deep breaths. In through your nose, and out through your mouth. Then breathe normally. In your mind, softly say the theme of this meditation: befriending death and dying. First, bring your attention to your head, top of your head, your face, and your jaw. Just bring your attention there. Breathe in this sensation and release it by breathing out. Bring your attention now to your neck, your shoulders, your arms down to your hands and fingers. Breathe in this sensation and release it by breathing out. Bring your attention to your spine, your rib cage that contains your heart and lungs. Breathe in this sensation and release it by breathing out. Bring your attention to your belly, your stomach and intestines. Breathe in this sensation and release it by breathing out. Bring your attention to your lower back, your pelvis and your seat area. Breathe in this sensation and release it by breathing out. Bring your attention to your legs, down to your feet and toes. Breathe in this sensation and release it by breathing out. Now breathe in your entire field of sensation, your body. Breathe out, release this into the vast field of awareness that holds it and everything. Breathe in sensation arising. Breathe out sensation returning to the infinite field of awareness. Breathe in the now of this moment. Breathe this out into the nowhere of awareness. Breathe in the bright vision of this now with its rich residue of spices. Breathe out this momentary pasture into the loving awareness of now, here, nowhere, now, here. Breathe in now. Breathe out now, here. Breathe in now. Breathe out nowhere. Breathe in loving sensation. Breathe out eternal awareness. Breathe in being. Breathe out becoming. Breathe in life. Breathe out life lived. For a moment, let's see if we can hold this befriending of death and dying, this befriending of now and nowhere. Befriending life that lives you. And so to finish, take one deep breath and slowly release. And when you're ready, if your eyes were closed, open your eyes. And I'm going to ask Carlos to break us into pairs to reflect on this. What does this, what was this like? Did it make any sense to you? I mean, that's not even the right wording. Did it touch? Did it elicit something? But it was my attempt to reflect Mary Oliver's poem in a more visceral way. But let's just share ourselves, and let's see what comes up because it really is a mystery to befriend death and dying. Maybe you have your own ideas, but let's begin. Carlos, would you bring us into breakout rooms? So, in the spirit of what we've been practicing with mindfulness dialogue, giving space for every voice to at least express and share the way we've done in the breakout room. We come back now and listen for maybe an emerging collective voice, and we can hear from about 4 of us. So anyone feel moved to share? I'm intrigued because this one has meant a lot to me personally for some reason. And I'm intrigued to hear what came up for you. So who would like to share? And if you feel moved at all, just make sure you're unmuted and just jump in, because I can't see everyone. Mary Ellen, go right in.
Thanks. I'll be brief. I was delighted to be paired with Michael, who's at the airport and still managed to be astonishingly profound, I thought. But he does have the advantage of being an Irishman. So so we talked about Mary Oliver, and actually, Danny, you had said unmattering, meaning becoming less aware of our importance, surrendering our importance as in things that matter. But I had taken it, Michael and I talked about another way to put it, the unmattering as decomposition. Mm-hmm. Then how the idea that nothing ever goes away, but we're transformed. Mm-hmm. And so it was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for a beautiful reflection.
Oh, thank you for this. That's so lovely to hear, Mary. Thanks so much. Anyone else?
Well, okay.
Another Mary. Mary's even.
Okay, thank you. I thank you. I was speaking with Tom, and we went along the same. We fixed ourselves on that word also, and we spoke of it sort of from a neurophysics. Or anyway, came from two sides to like, what does it matter, and from the perspective that that was just offered here, in the molecules and the matter and unmattering in that way. And we sort of concluded that they could actually be the same thing.
Wonderful way to put it, Mary. Thank you so much. We have 2. It says iPad Mini 4 and then Adriana.
Probably me, iPad Mini 4.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. Well, I was with Susan, who's down in the corner there. And I told her at the beginning, I was a little disappointed because I'm so into spring, and there we were being taken to fall. and then I recalled, well, I have right in front of me, that I received from my niece 2 beautiful peonies in full bloom yesterday. Today, they're not in full bloom anymore. So it helped me to go into the theme of tonight. And also, I didn't mention to Susan, but we spent the last weekend in our community talking about transformation, because of the religious communities are all in transformation. And it's kind of like a kind of death, but something new is going to be born. So that's kind of where we are. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen.
Oh, Maureen, it is. And I know there was Adriana Mendez was, go for it, Adriana. Let's hear.
Well, I don't know how much go for it. I was with Paola, it was lovely to meet her. And we both, for different reasons, came in late. I always struggle because I'm on Central Time. So that's 4 o'clock starting here. I'm not quite up to par. So we were trying to glean the various meanings of the Mary Oliver poem. And I confess that I just barely had a chance to glance at it. We were wondering, Danny, if you could perhaps expound on it some more. But what we did get out of it, and I think this was Paola's thought, was the idea of being underground as a kind of maybe a metaphor for death, also decomposition, as you all mentioned before. But one thing that I shared with her that I wanted to share with the group, because I thought it was very apropos. So I live in Missouri. I think I'm the only Midwesterner here. Although I go to school in upper state New York, they're in Ithaca. So I got my Eastern credentials. Anyway, we have had the season of the cicadas. And they have been chirping and chirping and chirping and chirping. They're,
Cicadas,
the
yeah.
scientific, I call it cicadas as in Spanish. So they come in cycles. I think we have a 13-year cycle and maybe a 17 or a longer year cycle. From what I gather, then they're mating, so full of life. And the sound is just like it's like a symphony. But anyway, when they finish, and I don't know exactly when that'll be, they go down to the ground and they die. And then the new generation, for the new generation to be born. So I just wanted to share with that because it's something that has been really surrounding me as I walk. Like when you walk, sometimes they fly off, they fly into your body or they fly into your legs. So, but to me, it was when I read that poem, even though, again, it was a bit in haste, I thought of the cycle of the cicadas and that we are in a different cycle, but somehow they accept their cycle, their release into nature and into mating and into life, and then the acceptance to fall back on the ground for another 13 or 17 years. So I wanted to share that with the group. And Danny would love it if you could expound or maybe share with us the poem again for those who come who kind of got it somewhat in haste.
Well, no, it is so powerful. What you say, I remember being moved by this poem 20 years ago. I remember using it at a friend's memorial service. But the idea of death being the way to new life, that there is no other way. You see it time and time again, but understandably we resist it, perhaps because, I don't know, we only have partial awareness, partial consciousness, the gift and the curse maybe of a little bit of consciousness, like as beings, I sometimes think. But the piece of releasing in order to contribute, that's what's flowing in my mind. It's like the out breath is what allows the bird to sing. It's the breathing out, it's the letting go that turns, if you like, the life that I receive and live into a contribution to an unfolding God. That's probably a big statement for a lot of people, but for me, in a sense, I remember being moved by a book by a man called Gregory Baum many, many years ago, a Canadian theologian, called God Becoming. And it always gave me a sense that the whole dualistic world that we have been brought up in our various faiths of a God out here never really sat with me, never helped me reflect or understand a world that I felt was something else, that was a constant unfolding of life and death. I think Mary Oliver captures that so well. I think maybe what I will offer as a way for us to explore this strange mystery of living and dying and life and death is a story. This is a story by Rilke on
Mm.
how we need to cultivate death, even to cultivate death and dying. Get in there, mess around in it. It will produce, I think, the wisdom we're looking for as elders.
Mhm.
This is what this little story of Rilke says. So if you could bear with me, I'm going to read you a story
Beautiful.
and then invite you to see what it means for you. And this is Rilke. He wrote these stories for children because he felt they were the only ones who could really hear them. This is a story about two people who loved and wanted nothing but each other. But then life makes such loving very challenging. So they decided to leave the daily world and go into solitude, where they built themselves a house and a garden. The house had two doors, the man's door, through which passed everything he cared about, and the woman's door, through which came and went all the things of her life. So many things came and passed through the house, as they do when one knows how to receive.
Mm.
Thus their lives were full and happy. Then one morning death appeared at the woman's door, but she reacted and slammed the door shut.
Mm.
After that, some time death appeared at the man's door, but he reacted in the same way as his wife. And they didn't speak to each other about this occurrence, but they opened both doors less often and tried to get along with what they had in the house.
Mm.
Of course, they had to live much more meagerly than before, so things grew scarce and cares set in. They began to sleep badly, and in one of those long wakeful nights, they both at once heard a strange shuffling and knocking noise. It came from outside the house wall, midway between the two doors, and sounded like someone was trying to break out the stones and make a new door.
Mm.
Even in their terror, the two pretended not to notice anything unusual. They began to live like prisoners. They began to talk and laugh unnaturally loud. Their health began to fail, and they had strange fancies. When the noise would be heard, they would laugh with their lips, while their hearts almost died with fear. Finally, one day, the woman, who had never really seen death, in all innocence, let him enter. Death simply said, somewhat unclearly, "Give this to your husband," and handed her a little bag. "It is seed, very good seed," Death added, before hurrying off without looking back.
Mm.
But when the woman looked at the seeds in the bag, she said to herself, "Seed is something incomplete, belonging to the future. I won't give my husband these. They don't look at all like a gift. Rather, I will tuck them in the flower bed outside and see what grows out of them. Then I will lead him to the place and tell him how I came by it."
Mm.
That's what she did. So once again, the man and the woman began to live as before. The man could not forget that death had stood before his door and was at first somewhat uneasy, but when he saw the woman as open and carefree as ever, he too soon opened his door again, so that much life and light came back into the house. The following spring, there stood in the flower bed among tender tiger lilies a small shrub with narrow blackish leaves, rather pointed like those of the laurel, and a peculiar gleam lay on their dark surface. Every day the man intended to ask where the plant had come from, but every day he failed to do so. In a similar way, the woman withheld her explanation, but the suppressed question on the one side and the never ventured answer on the other drew the two together often before the little plant, the green darkness of which contrasted so strangely with the garden. The next year they both busied themselves with the shrub as much as with the other plants, but were saddened when, surrounded by so much growing bloom, it came up unchanged, insensible seemingly to the sun. Then it was that, without telling each other, they determined to devote all their energy in the third spring to this plant.
Mm.
As that spring appeared, they fulfilled hand in hand what each had promised to himself. The garden all around grew wild, and the lilies seemed paler than usual. But once, after a night heavy and overcast, they stepped into the garden and saw that from the sharp, dark leaves of the strange plant, a pale blue flower had sprung.
Mm.
And they stood before it, united and silent. And now they knew less than ever what to say, for they were thinking, now death is flowering. And together they bent down to savor the fragrance of the young bloom.
Mm.
And since that morning, everything has been different in the world.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
That's a wonderful little story. A wonderful little story.
Yeah.
Just hold it for a second.
Mm.
Let me add another little Mary Oliver piece to feed our reflections together on what that story said to you. It says so much.
Mm.
This is Mary Oliver again. It's from a piece called When Death Comes. It echoes a little bit of Rilke's story. She says, when it's over, this is the end. Imagine the young couple when they had cultivated the plant and experienced the beauty of the bloom. When it's over, says Mary Oliver, I want to say all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this. Isn't she wonderful? I think what she's saying is that the human way of living in the world that includes death is to experience it all, including the difficult parts, which means letting death in, like the couple in the story finally did. So, Carlos, I know you're going to enjoy this little session, all of you together.
Could everybody else mute? I'm sorry. Could everybody mute again?
All right. So, Carlos, you want to break us up?
Yep.
And away we go. Enjoy it. And here they come tumbling in.
Mhm.
All right.
I'm Carolyn, and I just tumbled in too.
Hello, Carolyn. Welcome.
Hi, Danny.
Hey. So, what did that stir in you? Again, if you feel moved, just go ahead and share whatever came up for you. Susan has a hand up.
Okay.
Unmute yourself, Susan. Just make sure you're unmuted if you're going to speak.
Sure. My name's Susan File, and I'm an ordained Presbyterian minister 29 years ago. And I retired a couple of years ago. And retiring from being in a church every week and serving has been rather difficult. And I realize it's a kind of ambiguous loss, according to Pauline Boss. There's a quality of grief about it, loss as loss and grief, ambiguous loss. The church is actually there, but I'm not there with it. And so I've become more creative in using my ministry in my counseling practice. I'm also a therapist, licensed therapist, and I build more spirituality into my practice. But I find it's been a tremendous adjustment not being in a church regularly. And I didn't realize it would be that challenging. So for anybody who's retiring recently from active ministry, it's been a big discovery. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs with belonging on that middle tier, identity, sense of purpose, all of that. I've had to address those issues and find new ways to be in ministry, which are not in a church. But I'm getting better at it. And I'm not quite so grumpy. And I'm finding there are plenty of ways. There's no shortage. So I just wanted to put that up for anybody who's retiring and has changed their lifestyle, there is what we call Pauline Boss's ambiguous loss, which is a form of grief and loss. It's a kind of death.
That's wonderful, Susan. It even sounds a little bit like cultivating death in the sense
Yeah,
of
Mm,
yeah.
you stepped into it rather than
mm.
deny it or run away from it. Thanks so much, Susan.
Thank you.
So what else came up? Pamela.
Okay. So I felt the meeting rooms were really wonderful. Today, meeting people from the Midwest, and having a really intense conversation, but being in the same language. I don't know if that, like, talking about deep things when you're not intimately friendly is very, very difficult for a lot of people. And it was a pleasure to talk with two wonderful people who could be in that place. And I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
That's a powerful sort of observation too, Pamela, that we need to create the space, the sacred space, the safe space. The container is what we call it in mindfulness dialogue, where something new can happen. And it is much easier sometimes than we appreciate. That's a wonderful insight.
Mm.
I'm going to ask my dear friend Carlos if he would share a story, if he's up for it, that he shared with me during the breakouts.
Well, okay, Danny, I was moved by Danny's story and his saying that he wanted to be in a place of embracing death and being in that place when it comes to him. And I shared a story of my father basically 30 years ago now, calling us. He had a habit, or he had a ritual of calling all of his family and all of his friends on New Year's Day. And it was actually usually New Year's Eve. So we would usually get a call around 8 or 9 or 10 or so, and it would be my dad sort of checking in and giving us all a hearty embrace and letting us know that he loved us. And this particular year, he unusually called me at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was in my room in my home for half an hour. It's only a half hour I was there, and I happened to catch his call. And we had a small little exchange, and he said that he was wishing me and my wife Ruth a lovely new year, and that he loved us. And it was a beautiful exchange. I loved him, and I told him so. 2 hours later, I got a call from my sister that he had died on his last call, as he was making his last call to his last friend. And what a beautiful way to die. Oh my goodness. What a beautiful way of embracing his family and his friends.
Yeah.
Loving us. So that's what came to mind. Embracing death, embracing what's coming.
Thank you so much, brother. So much. Another voice. Another voice. Sue, dear friend Sue. Make sure you're unmuted.
There we go. Wow, that was such a powerful story, Carlos. And I can't help thinking that the person who is dying is moving on to this unknown world. They're on their way, something we can't even imagine. But the rest of us, it takes years to recover from these losses, parents, grandparents, spouses, children, which must be among the worst. But in some of the conversations I've had today, and I agree with Pamela about the breakout rooms and the themes for the discussions today, although they are always very rich. But we are anecdotally, the ones that we've had, we feel that we are doing our best to befriend death. We are trying to do what we can to befriend death, but it's the process of dying that is, it's so unknown for all of us. And now we are at the stage and age where our friends are being, it's kind of like watching a great tree being felled, and their quality of life from this point on is never going to be the same. I was talking with a new friend, Linda, in Oregon, and she said, they do have the right to death with dignity in that state now, and that she has a close friend who's just had a very paralyzing stroke at the end of her life. And, what do you do with that? I have another friend that I just went to see in DC who has a series of autoimmune diseases that didn't even come about until she turned 70. And now it's just a steady process of decline. And none of us knows what's going to happen to us, either. So it's that thing, that part of the equation that I think is very unnerving. But many of the people with whom I've talked, they're so busy with what they're doing. And once you make it through that transition, Susan, from retirement, and I think leaving the mothership of an organization is never easy. It just isn't. Your structure has gone away. Your main mission and purpose of every day is different now. But you do get to the other side of it, and it lots as evidenced by everyone with whom I've spoken, they're all on to things that keep them very excited and invigorated, and they care about what's going on in the world. So I guess where I'm going with this, I'm not quite sure. So I think I'll stop.
Oh,
I do want to say one other thing. I love Mary Oliver. I always have. Think of her as Saint Mary Oliver. But that phrase about momentary pastures, that just stuck with me so much. All these, and now especially, I don't know, in this particular stage of elderhood, everything seems to me to be a momentary pasture. And there's brilliant light and different, the composition of the pasture is different, but then I know it's only here briefly. And we're moving through all these momentary pastures. But yes, thank you for that wonderful poem, Danny.
Oh, thank you, Sue. And beautiful reflection as well. And I think the very Linda that you spoke of has her hand raised. So we'll hear from Linda as a way of pulling it together.
Well, I was struck, Teresa and I had a conversation, and I was really struck by the image of the blue flower and the fragrance, that the fragrance that this growing of this plant of death brought into that household. And Teresa felt a bit dismayed that the couple, at least as reported by the storyteller, Rilke, didn't ever talk to one another, didn't share, didn't look eye to eye at one another. And I was saying that one of the things that interests me about being this age, and there are many things that interest me, but is that there is this matter of how those of us of a certain age who are considering all of these themes that we've been considering in this group it's in a sense, we are imbibing the fragrance of that flower. And that it's not absolutely necessary always to talk eye to eye about it. I think that's what Rilke did in his brilliance as a storyteller, is instead of them looking at each other and processing it and discussing it and dealing with all their feelings on the psychological level, and that they were involved in caring for this plant that had been bequeathed to them by death. And in that, they grew closer and also more reconciled to what was coming. That's a beautiful part of that story, and I really thank you for sharing it, along with your story, Carlos. Beautiful image to have. I realize that the last words I hope escape my lips are, I love you.
Linda, just to pick up on what you said about the story, one of the lines is, and that spring appeared, and as that spring appeared, they fulfilled hand in hand what each had promised to himself. I thought that was very powerful for me, and it echoed a lot of what you were saying there. So much, and the time is always too short, but let's step into our last stage of discovering together. And for those of you that are not familiar, the third stage of a mindfulness dialogue, we start with connecting, exploring is what we've been doing. Discovering is now listening for maybe an insight, a thought, an image, even a feeling that has been generated in our interaction. We don't all see things the same way, and that's good. So let me invite you back into that mindfulness meditation place for a minute or two. So just take a deep breath. Breath is such a powerful metaphor. Be aware of your body. Just notice any sensations you feel. It helps just to notice them as sensations. Thoughts stay away when you simply focus on the sensation, what you're feeling in your heart, in your back, in your legs. Breathe in that sensation, this living, this now, this momentary pasture. And breathe out, release into the now, that now is nowhere, now here. And as we do this, living this momentary pasture and offering it back to this infinite field of awareness that holds us in being. Perhaps you hear a thought, an idea, an image arising, coming out of us, coming out of our interaction this evening. So let's spend the next 5 minutes maybe making our own collage of poetry or prayer, whatever you call it, out of what has surfaced for you, what has stirred in you, and is what is rising now to the surface. Give voice to it. Doesn't have to be eloquently formed. Doesn't matter. Just there's something you start to say or start to feel, please feel free. And we'll do this for 5 minutes, like our own little, as I said, prayer. If you're going to share something, make sure you're unmuted, and we'll just do that. And don't wait for me to ask.
My story with my mom when she was dying is different than Carlos. Carlos had a beautiful story. But my mom and I were very, very close all the time, all my life. Emotionally and spiritually, we shared so much. And when she was dying, she had a tumor on her brain, so she wasn't quite the same. And I kept looking for a moment to really speak to her, close with her closeness. And I couldn't find that moment. And so a social worker told me, just say what you need to say to her. So one day when she was sitting watching TV, I said, Mom, if something happens to you, I'd miss you every day. And she turned and said, then don't let anything happen. And turned right back to the TV. But I felt like I said what I needed to say. And I felt like really so much better. And today listening to, our first group about a wind phone, where you get to talk to people that have died and say the things you want to say. That it reminded me of that moment with my mom that was close for me.
Thank you, Beth. That's beautiful.
I'm hesitant after such beautiful sharing from Beth, but I was thinking about a quotation. I love Teilhard de Chardin, and a friend of mine recently told me about one of his favorite observations or insights from Chardin, and it wasn't one I was familiar with, and I haven't been able to find it yet, the actual wording, but the idea is that Chardin talked about and urged us not to become diminished by our diminishment. Not to surrender to that, to the sense, because we can't change the fact that we are being diminished physically as we age, but we don't have to feel diminished somehow. I thought it was very powerful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so. Go ahead, Michael.
I was taken back, and I shared a little bit, paraphrase it, but I just found it when I was working with Susan and heard that wonderful story about her mother. Parker Palmer addressing young people heading out into life, and he was sharing things, and he shared the good news is that suffering can be transformed into something that brings life, not death. It happens every day. I know people who've suffered the loss of the dearest person in their lives. At first, they go into deep grief, certain that their lives will never again be worth living. But then they slowly awaken to the fact that not in spite of their loss, but because of it, they've become bigger, more compassionate people with more capacity of heart to take in other people's sorrows and joys. These are broken-hearted people, but their hearts have been broken open rather than broken apart. And his advice to the 21-year-olds was, so every day, exercise your heart by taking in life's pains and joys. That kind of exercise will make your heart supple, so that when it breaks, which it surely will, it will break not into a fragment grenade, but into a greater capacity for love.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Another voice to weave something.
Well, I'll just add, I don't think there's any great wisdom in this, but it is true that we have Memorial Day in spring, and we go and we lay flowers on graves. And it's no accident that we lay flowers on graves, because they are such an incredible symbol of fruition and beauty and transitoriness. And from this session, I'm just beginning to think that death is a flowering. If we can change our ideas about death into it actually being the flowering of our lives, it's wonderful.
I think, Marjorie, maybe there's a place to see if we can close. I have two closing remarks. One is a little indelicate, but nonetheless very relevant to the eldering stage of our lives. It's something I've been struggling with. Constipation. Which is when I fail to release and let go physically. You know, it feels to me that this physical challenge is a reflection of a deeper existential challenge of living and dying, receiving and releasing from moment to moment. When I hold on to things, and I do, they become distorted and even destructive. We say that a healthy colon means a healthy body. We might add that being in the flow of creative living requires having a healthy flow. In my body, it means receiving and releasing, living and dying literally. As I said, it's a little indelicate, but it felt valid and relevant to say it. Rilke completes the picture as always with his sense of the unique contribution that we, all of us, bring to the mystery of life. Which for him is kind of the voice of life, the one that sings for the voiceless one. Let me see if I can share the screen. It's a lovely little piece. And maybe someone would like to read it. It's called I'm Still the One. Anyone like to read this? Go for it, Marjorie.
I'm still the one who knelt before you in monk's robes, patiently waiting. You filled him as he called you into being, a voice from a quiet cell with the world blowing past. And you were ever again the wave sweeping through all things. That's all there is. Only an ocean where now and again islands appear. That's all there is. No harps, no angels, and the one before whom all things bow is the one without a voice. Are you then the all? And I, the separated one who tumbles and rages? Am I not the whole? Am I not all things when I weep? And you, the single one who hears it? Listen, don't you hear something? Aren't there voices other than mine? Is that a storm? I am one also, whipping the trees to call to you.
Thank you so much. Again, we could spend the evening on that poem alone, but I just want to close by offering one line of it that has helped me, because I so relate to the imagery. I'm still the one kneeling before you in monk's robes, silently waiting. Doesn't ever go away for us. But you filled him. This is Rilke speaking to the one without the voice. You filled him as he called you into being. It's almost like a contract. Breathing in is to be filled. You filled him. Breathe in, breathe out. You sing the voice, sing life. That's our role. That's the role of everything. But perhaps in a particular way, this is our human contribution. To breathe in, you filled him, and to breathe out your life. Anyway, we could, as I said, continue, but before I hand it over to Carlos to remind us of our ongoing conversation and Kathleen to close, let me suggest as to look forward to what I'd imagine to be an appropriate ending to this series. I think the next session, perhaps we could reflect on what some call the afterlife. I mentioned early, reincarnation, words like resurrection, for some, sort of go together. And then a final session, we can try to pull it all together into something, an eldering in grace that can serve our struggling world. So let me hand it to Carlos and then to Kathleen to close it out for us this evening.
Danny, when based on tonight's sharing, I was thinking of this thing that I've seen in a poster in my work lately. It says, "If in a world where you can be anything, be kind. Choose to be kind." And I'm also reminded of my experience with my dad, that in a world where you could say anything at all to anybody at any time, connect with them and tell them that you love them as if it was your last. What a gift. So I just invite you all to think about living in a world where this may be your last, and how would you want to be if this is your last moments? What would you like to share with each other for each other, to each other. Maybe this can be what we practice in our, as we wind down, take a minute, take 5 minutes to write down to each of us a gift, your last words. Think of it that way, your last words to us. That's a gift of your being to the community that you're with. What a way to be, what a way to live. That is truly living. And I just invite you to do that. Your voice is important. Share with us what comes out of this time together. Do you want to share with this community as if this was your last statement? Who knows? And write to us at contact@anewglobalwe.com. Just give us 5 minutes of your precious time. Tell us what you're thinking right now.
Thank you, Carlos, so much. And let me invite our dear Kathleen to close out for me, a beautiful conversation.
Danny, thank you for your always careful and masterful, mindful way of drawing us into dialogue about the most profound things and the most challenging things, and for inviting us to meet each other in those places. People we know, people we don't know. I had the difficult blessing of giving back a whole nother part of my heart to whatever it is we give back when we have to let go and release someone we love this past week. And making a long journey to the memorial of this dear, beautiful, beautiful, wild, and wonderful friend. His wife is likewise Susan. She is a priest in the Episcopal Communion. And she found a way to speak of letting Danny go. And she reminded us that Karl Rahner once upon a time said, we have to stop thinking of death as some sort of cosmic passage, that somehow we leave this universe. It's not possible. It's not possible. There is only the circumference of this cosmos, which is the unfolding body of divinity itself. And so Rahner said, think instead of a cosmos, that death is the opportunity to become all cosmos. So I have had, and I share with you this blessing that Danny bequeathed on us to really feel his enlargement, no longer in that one body and that one locale, but somehow now in the great expanse of this ever unfolding, living, breathing body of God. So thank you each and all for being here tonight. We've made another wonderful milestone of the 15th anniversary of the passing of our beloved Father Thomas Berry, who has challenged us to imagine everything anew. And it will help us so much. So thank you, Danny. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, each and every one. Good night.
Good night.